Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome back. Uh, this weekend, we have a situation similar to the one that we had 2 weeks ago, which is rain is predicted for Sunday. Now, 2 weeks ago, we went ahead with our service. We saw no rain. That was great. Um, we might see some this week, so I'm going to be there in the morning, and just in case it doesn't rain. But if it does, you have the video, and of course, I'll email out the manuscript for the message as well. This week, we're going to be talking about Gideon. We're still in the book of Judges, looking at people that we call unlikely heroes. Now, of course, this week is also Veterans Day, so I want to say Happy Veterans Day to any veterans of the various armed services, and appreciate that. You are our heroes, for sure. When I was in 5th grade, our teacher divided the class into various groups for debates. And my group was going to debate the topic that everything is possible against another group of classmates who were going to begin from the perspective that not everything is possible. Some things are just plain not possible. And so I volunteered to lead my particular group in this debate, and we went off into another room and started brainstorming. And the first thing I said, well, we need to have some kind of a motto that we follow. And so our motto was, under God, anything is possible. And so I assigned one of the people in the group to go back and tell the teacher our motto. Person came back and said, nope. Teacher nixed the idea, said we cannot bring religion into the debate. And so we countered with our motto, there's a first time for everything. And I thought that was a lot of fun, and we had fun with the debate. And really some weird things came out. But, we were in 5th grade. And so that's going to happen with 5th grade. But it was a lot of fun. In the years that I've been in ministry, one of the things I have done regularly is read books from the business world, books on management, leadership, integrity, because it's not that a church is a business, because it's not. You can't treat it like a business. If you do, then you're going to be doing some things wrong. But there are a lot of principles in the field of business that are many times applicable to the church, and especially when it comes to things like good, healthy management, leadership, showing integrity in your decision making. Well, of all the business books I've read, dozens, I'm not sure how many exactly, but my very favorite title is The Answer to How is Yes. When something seems impossible, the only people to find the possibility are the people who say yes, even in the midst of an impossible task, because in order to find the solution, you first have to believe in the possibility of one. And so just as in 5th grade, we were looking at the idea that there's a first time for everything, the answer to how is yes, as we look at the perplexing situations in which Israel finds itself in the book of Judges. Their situations looked like they had no solution, like each time, like God had completely forsaken them. Well, today we're going to look at a brief character study of Gideon, one of the judges, who does not have the appearance of a hero. His faith is far from robust, his courage is minimal, and his credentials in terms of family background and preparation are almost non-existent. His father, Joash, was a priest of a pagan shrine. Gideon embodies within himself and his situation the fate of the whole nation. But he's a defeatist, and he's negative without hope or vision. The whole nation was like that. But God knows potential when you and I don't see it. Now, his story is found in Judges chapter 6, 7, and 8. We're just going to look at portions of it. And first, we're going to look at a portion from chapter 6. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And remember, that's part of our pattern that we're seeing in Judges. And for 7 years, he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Well, these Midianites never go away. It seems that they're constantly coming back in and oppressing Israel. Because of the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in the mountain clefts and caves and strongholds. See, they were hiding away from the Midianites. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and others from the eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land, ruined the crops, and did not spare a living thing for Israel. Neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and their camels. They invaded the land to ravish it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites, they cried out to the Lord for help. Again, that's part of the pattern. Israel does evil in the eyes of the Lord. He gives them over to an oppressor, and finally they cry out. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them from you before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." And the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. So he was working, but he was hiding his work. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "But sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us in the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Pretty amazing. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Gideon was working in the threshing floor. That means he was using a pitchfork and throwing grain up in the air to let the grain fall down and the wind blow the chaff away. And this is after the oxen had walked over to break up the grain and the chaff. He said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel." What strength? Gideon's response, "How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least of my family." Gideon, the embodiment of an unlikely hero. Gideon's image of himself was one who could not accomplish the task for which he was commissioned. He was to lead the Israeli army and defeat the Midianites. You see, Gideon needed someone who could boost him. I once had a boss, Mr. Bick, I worked for when I was a driving instructor. And one of the things Mr. Bick would say to me over and over was, "Terry, if I had your gifts, I could accomplish a lot." Well, he saw me differently than I saw myself. He was one of these guys who was always driven, always had a lot of energy for things, but he could see giftedness in others. And he wasn't opposed to telling people what he saw as giftedness. And so Gideon was to go forth and lead the army and defeat the Midianites. But God wanted him to do it in a different way. You see, God didn't want him to do it in the normal way that you and I would accomplish something like that. In fact, the first thing God did, and I urge you to go and read this in chapter 6, God reduced the size of the Israeli army from thousands and thousands. They started out with 32,000 soldiers, and by the time God was happy with the size of the army. They only had 300 left. So go back and read the details of how that happens. It's just a hilarious story. But just a couple of quick lessons from the life of Gideon. One is your strength is greater than you think. Gideon didn't see himself as someone with any real strength. Your strength is greater than you think. Some years ago, I was appointed to a church in Piqua, Ohio, where I inherited several associate pastors, one of whom was named John. Got to know John, his wife Jennifer, their kids. In fact, I just saw them this week. They were in California for the week, and I got to meet them at a beach and lead them through vow renewal in anticipation of their 20th anniversary. And what a blast to do that with them and to get to see them again. But I was told about John from my district superintendent that John was someone who always saw himself as an associate pastor. He didn't see himself as a senior pastor. About a month into my time with John, I asked him to come into my office, and we sat down together, and I said, John, you've got the gifts to be a senior pastor, and I really think you need to start looking in that direction. Now, I didn't want to lose him as one of the associates because he was incredibly valuable in a lot of ways, and I could give you a list of a dozen different ways that he was so valuable. But I could see him as a senior pastor. And so I only got to have John as an associate for 1 year, and then the bishop appointed him to another church where he was a senior associate pastor. Then he was there for about 5 years. Then he got moved to a good-sized church in Dayton, Ohio, where he's been the senior pastor there. And he's one of these guys who's just going to continue to grow in his gifts, far beyond the way he originally saw himself. You see, his strength was greater than he thought because he didn't really understand completely all of his gifts. And the wonderful thing is that he's understanding that today. And he's very open to where God wants to take him and very open to where he's going to go next. And I know he's just going to have an incredible time. And so it's the same lesson Gideon had to learn. Your strength is greater than you think. But the other thing that Gideon received that I think it's important for us to remember is that God will always give assurance. When God calls you into something, God will always give assurance. And as you read through the Bible, you see that God did that with Joshua, did it with Abraham, with David, and now Gideon. He gives assurance in moments of doubt. I will be with you, God said to Joshua, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. To Abraham, God said, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. And to David, God said, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler. And for those who are in the Thursday Bible study, we've seen that also as we looked at Jesus' final departure from the apostles in all four Gospels. And one of the things he said to them, lo, I will be with you always to the ends of the earth. So how do you accomplish something when it looks impossible? Well, the answer to how is yes. Decide that there's actually a possibility there, and you can discover how to accomplish the task before you. When I was a driving instructor, I had a lady, older lady was one of my students, and I used to spend a lot of my mornings with women who were widows, who had never learned to drive. And she'd learned to drive fine, but the thing she couldn't do was, in those days in Ohio, instead of having a parallel park for your test, you had to do what they called a backing maneuver, which was similar to backing in or out of a parking space at a shopping mall parking lot. And she just couldn't get that down, but it was time for her test. And she told me beforehand, she said, I'm going to picture it in my mind that I can do this. And so the test instructor took her out for her test. And at one point I stood up and I looked out the door. and I could just see in the parking lot where she was to do this backing maneuver, backing within cones. And I just saw her. She just zipped that car back into that spot and then pulled it right back out. And I was so excited for her that she did that. Well, then they got back from the on the road um, test, and she failed on the road. And she was a fine driver. And so they came back in, and the tester came over to me and he said, she just did a couple of things wrong on the road. And he said, I could tell that she has the ability to drive, and she did great on the backing maneuver. So when she and I got back out to the car, I said, what happened? And she said, well, I was so focused on getting that backing maneuver down, and I could picture it in my mind, and I just kept praying, Lord, help me do this backing maneuver. And I did it perfectly, but I was so flustered, I messed up the driving test. She said, I'll come back next week and I'll pass that part, which she did. And that was a wonderful lesson, and she was a lot of fun. But for her, it was picturing it in her mind, something that she considered an impossible task, which she was able to accomplish. We've got lessons all around us, people that we know personally, people in the Bible, especially Gideon for this week, who was given what seemed to be an impossible task, and yet accomplished it, and accomplished it with God's help and with God's assurance. Who are the beloved? Go and be the beloved.